Hi, I'm Dr. Felice Gersh, your integrative OBGYN physician. I cannot tell you how often, I would say not even a day goes by that I don't have a few patients tell me, because I always ask everyone about their diet, their nutritional choices. I always have patients tell me, I don't eat fruit. Or if I do, it's very little and typically just berries. So I have to then explain, often painfully, because there is so much misunderstanding about fruit. So I always say there's a lot of things to be afraid of and to really work hard to avoid in this world. But fruit should not be on that list, not even near the list, okay? There are so many things you can work on to be healthy. Avoidance of fruit is just not one of them. In fact, the first message I want to deliver is a motto I created. I love creating mottos. I hope I'm not stealing someone else's motto, but I think that I created them. Anyway, this one is called Don't Be Afraid of Fruit, because this myth about fruit being harmful, hurting your health, causing diabetes, causing obesity is absurd. Okay? Do not ever think that again. And I know it's a very prevalent idea. In fact, there are sometimes prominent people in the healthcare delivery system that are talking about it, both on social media and in medical practices, saying, don't eat fruit. Now, first thing, like you should know what a fruit is, right? You want to know? Well, what is a fruit? It's actually the mature ovary of a flowering plant. And that's why I love talking about fruit, because it kind of hones in on the career I've had for decades, and that is dealing with ovaries and dealing with reproduction. So that's what a fruit is. It's the reproductive process of a plant. The plant makes a flower, and the flower turns into a fruit, which is typically consumed by some kind of a creature. And that is for the purpose of dispersal of the seeds to create baby plants, which will then make their own flowers and their own fruit. The purpose is to create new plants. So there are many types of fruits. And we're talking now, we'll talk about edible fruits, because, there are some fruits that get dispersed in different ways that humans should not eat because they may be poisonous. Well, don't eat those, okay? So what are some fruits that you may not even realize are fruits? I made a little list. Did you know the following are actually technically fruits? Most seeds and nuts. Once you realize that there's an encasement, and in a nut, the encasement may not be eaten. It may be a hard shell, okay? With a fruit, sometimes the encasement is edible, sometimes it's not. But inside, you would find the seeds. You might call the shell, the peel. So actually, technically, nuts are fruits. And then seeds are the seeds, right? So they came from a fruit. Now, here are some other fruits that you may not realize are fruits. Avocados, cucumbers, tomatoes, bell peppers, green beans, pumpkins, corn, coffee, peas, eggplant. Let's see, what else? Olives and chocolate. So the chocolate bean, cocoa bean, is from a fruit. So that's a fruit. So it's really important to realize that we love fruits, and there's many different kinds of fruits, and these are really nutritious. Now, where did this myth of fruit being harmful, where did it originate from? Well, I actually don't know what the origin was, but I lived through a lot of times when I heard a lot of negativity about fruit, and it always included the following word, fructose, okay? And you probably heard that word, fruit and fructose being tossed around together. And most people, even healthcare professionals, don't even know what fructose even is. They just think somehow it is intrinsically evil. Well, let me assure you, except for a very small percentage of people who have a form of hereditary disease that makes them have fructose intolerance, and that's called hereditary fructose intolerance, okay? That occurs rarely, in about 1 in 20 to 30,000 people. So that's probably, odds are, not you. Okay, it could be, but probably not. So we're not going to talk about that group of people. let's get back to what anyway is fructose. That seems to be the enemy, but not really. Some people think it's the enemy. So fructose is a monosaccharide. It's called a simple sugar. Now you may wonder, like, well, what is table sugar? Table sugar is called sucrose. And what does it consist of? It consists of equal parts of glucose and fructose. Now, you probably heard of high fructose corn syrup, and maybe you thought that was fructose, like you just like eating a peach. No, it is not, okay? So high fructose corn syrup uses the word fructose, but it's kind of like the same problem that I have a lot with estrogen. People use the word estrogen to mean lots of different things: endocrine disruptors, conjugated equine estrogens, all kinds of stuff. The estrogen, ethinyl estradiol, that's found in most oral contraceptives, and they throw around the word estrogen like it's all the same. That happened with fat. I always had to say, what fat? You know, there's different kinds of fat. Some are really good, and then there's trans fat, which is really bad. Well, what is high fructose corn syrup? Just because it has the word fructose in it doesn't mean it's the same as eating a peach or cherries or an apple or a pineapple or mangoes, and we can go on, right? It doesn't mean that at all. So high fructose corn syrup is it's kind of like table sugar. It's also a blend that is comparable. So it has the same things. It has in it glucose and it has in it fructose. And it is not the same as just having pure, simple fructose. So it's like sucrose. So it's like table sugar mixed with fructose in a way that is highly concentrated. Now, talk about sweetness. So fructose is the sweetest of all carbohydrates. It is ultra sweet. Now, why did nature do that? Well, many fruits are delicious because they are so sweet from this fructose that is contained. So how much sweeter is fructose? 1.2 to 1.8 times sweeter than table sugar is. So it's really very sweet and delicious. Now, not all fruits have the same amount of fructose. Like a cucumber is not the same as a cherry, but it's interesting. There are quite a few vegetables like onions and asparagus and mushrooms that also contain fructose. So fructose is not the enemy. High fructose corn syrup concentrated in ultra processed food, now that's an enemy. What about fructose alone, not combined with sucrose or glucose, just plain simple fructose from a fruit? It actually has minimal effect, really minimal effect on blood sugar. Why is it? Because it's not glucose, it's fructose. And to actually mobilize it into the liver where it is metabolized does not require insulin at all. There's no insulin needed to deal with fructose. Now, I mentioned the liver, and a lot of people say, oh no, if you eat fruit, it's going to give you fatty liver. That is not true. If you eat a lot of high fructose corn syrup and a lot of really bad ultra-processed food, then yes, you can get fatty deposits in your liver, in your pancreas, in your bone marrow, and a whole variety of terrible places like heart. You don't want all this excessive fat deposited. But that has nothing to do with eating a piece of fruit. Eating a banana doesn't give you fatty liver disease, okay? What happens in the liver when you eat fruit to the fructose? Well, it can be converted into glucose. Yes, it can. It can be converted into triglycerides, which are a type of fat. Yes, it can. I just want to make sure I didn't forget anything. I knew I forgot something. Lactate. So the other element, molecule that can be made in the liver from fructose, from fruit, is lactate. So it's glucose, fats, which is like triglycerides, and also lactate, okay? So yes, the liver does metabolize the fructose, but it does it into these different things. It's important to know that it does not cause fatty liver disease, eating a piece of fruit. it's interesting. I went through a lot of the literature on fruit before I talked to you because I wanted to make sure I said all the right, legit things. So there's actually quite a few studies published showing that people who eat a lot of fruit have a lower incidence of insulin resistance and diabetes. People who are diabetic and eat fruit will have better glycemic control. It helps their glucose levels and it actually can bring down their hemoglobin A1C. So it's like the exact opposite. Now, this has been really, really hard for many dietitians to latch onto and accept. They keep saying, but no, it can't be. But yes, it can be. Even dried fruit. Okay. You think, well, no, but you can't eat dried fruit. Well, I looked up the data on dried fruit. And you recognize that you do have to think somewhat about volume, right? But eating like moderate portions of dry fruit actually is also totally healthy and does not make you fat, does not make you diabetic. They even have a study showing that people who ate 3 times a day an ounce of all things, raisins, which of course are dried grapes, they actually had better glycemic control than those who did not eat the raisins, because raisins, like all fruit, are filled with all kinds of vitamins, antioxidants, polyphenols, and fiber. I can't emphasize the importance of fiber. It's incredibly important for your gut microbiome, and it makes you feel fuller. And the fiber that's in fruit causes a delay in the fructose, in the entire digestive process. So if you think about unloading, okay, like unpacking the food, the faster you can unpack the food and get the ingredients in the food into the bloodstream, that is very bad if we were talking about glucose, right? Or sucrose. We do not want any kind of high release of sugar into the blood. And that would, of course, include all ultra-processed foods. They unpack really fast. The so-called simple carbs, like bread, typical bread that is mostly just very fine powdered, usually wheat, right? Or corn or rice flour, something like that. When it's powderized, it goes right into the bloodstream as sugar, okay? And we do not want that, okay? So ultra-processed foods unpack their contents, which includes usually high fructose corn syrup, which then turns into lots of glucose in the bloodstream very quickly. That is a bad thing. And that, of course, predisposes to diabetes and then all the ills related to that. When you have fruit, the high quantity of fiber causes that fruit to unpack slowly its nutrients. So it keeps you fuller way longer. So it's really very great as an appetite suppressant. Like you won't feel like eating more. Have you ever tried to eat a very large apple? After a while, it's like I can never finish them because you just are appled out. It really fills you up. And the fruit has lots of fiber, even dried fruit. So I looked up like dried plums, also known as prunes. And there are actually studies showing that people who ate like 4 to 8 prunes a day had better glucose levels than people who didn't, because it has so much in terms of the fiber, but also the other ingredients that work to make the person who's consuming it healthier so that they have better ability. Their mitochondria will work better, their cells will work better. Everything works better because it has all the vitamins and the minerals and the antioxidants, the polyphenols. And what else does the fiber do besides slow the unpacking of the ingredients of the food? It nourishes the gut microbial population, that famous and wonderful gut microbiome. And this is very linked to diabetes. When they've looked at the gut microbiome of people with diabetes, what did they find? They have a dysbiotic or abnormal gut microbiome, which is helped by eating fruit. So that's one of the reasons why people who eat a lot of fruit will have better glycemic control because the food unpacks its nutrients, which includes the fructose, slower. And in addition, you're really improving tremendously the gut microbiome. Now, let's talk a little bit about that. You may say, but wait a minute, not me. I worked with a continuous glucose monitor, and when I eat a piece of fruit, my glucose goes through the roof. Well, I don't deny whatever it is that you're finding. If that's the case, that is a giant red flag. They've done studies on people who eat fruit. And what did they find? That you can get different levels of blood sugar after someone eats the same identical piece of fruit. Like you're not doing it as part of a meal, which I'm going to talk about combining fruit with meals, but you're just having like an apple. So you have 10 people eating identical apples. They're all fasted. They're not eating anything else. And then they measure the blood sugar, okay? And they find that they get 10 different blood sugar levels, like in a half an hour, and 2 hours, and so on, if you do a glucose tolerance test with an apple. So what did they find? The people who had the higher levels of glucose, their blood sugar went up. Now remember, fructose is not glucose. It's not blood sugar. It's a different thing. You have to look at what's happening here because fructose is not glucose, okay? But let's just say you have a really high spike of blood sugar after you eat a piece of fruit. That is a red flag that you have an abnormal gut microbiome. So the solution isn't stop eating fruit. The solution is you got to do something right now to start working on repairing your gut microbiome. The last thing anybody should want is a severely restrictive diet. In fact, it's been shown that all the different fruits have different colors. They all represent different magical polyphenols that are incredible for health, all kinds of different parts of health maintenance and repair. So if you have a problem and you decided that you were going to get a continuous glucose monitor and you actually do have a spike, then you've got a problem. The problem isn't the fruit. The problem is in you because a healthy individual with a normal gut microbiome will not have that response. You need to see a healthcare professional who's going to start giving you appropriate fiber-containing foods, probiotics. You probably have leaky gut. Maybe you need to go on butyrate and zinc carnosine, some L-glutamine. I mean, we have protocols for how to help people to repair an improper gut microbiome. Maybe you have SIBO or SIFO, and that needs to be worked on. Maybe you should be treated with the special antibiotics used for those conditions. But know that's a red flag. That is not a normal response. So the takeaway is that you really need to love fruit. Don't be afraid of fruit. Quite a few years ago, you may remember this, back in the day, when Weight Watchers was, maybe they still are, I actually don't know, but they were doing this thing with points. And at one point in their modification of their point system, they said all fruit and all vegetables have 0 points. Oh my gosh, what a ruckus occurred after that announcement. So many people said, and I knew a lot of these people, they were functional medicine doctors, naturopathic doctors. They said, no way, fruit is so full of fructose. There should be a limit on it. They should not be eating. People should not be eating much or any fruit. It's really bad for you. That broke my heart because what? No, that's not true. Weight Watchers got it right. I don't know what they do now, but I remember that when they said 0 points for fruits and vegetables. Eat all you want. So I'm giving you that same message. Eat all you want. Don't eat crap. Don't eat ultra-processed food. If you're going to go on a binge, go on a fruit binge. I don't want you to go on any binge, but if you're going to, that's what you should eat. Okay? Have always at hand like fresh whole fruit. Now, I mentioned that dry fruit actually has been shown to be healthy, but because it's the same amount of fruit takes up a much smaller volume, you may end up eating 2 to 5 or 10 times the volume. So we're talking about equivalent volumes, okay? So it's not like you can have a cup of dried fruit and that equals the cup of whole fruit that's fresh, okay? Because that would be an excessive amount. I always talk my little mottos, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Even the best foods can be overdosed. On the other hand, fruit is usually self-limited. Usually at a certain point, people say, I've had enough. It's amazing how the fiber fills you up and you just naturally stop, okay? If you didn't, you'll still be way better off than if you ate a box of cookies, a container of ice cream, a giant bag of chips. You'll still be better off because you're getting at least the fiber, all the polyphenols, the antioxidants, the minerals, the vitamins, and so on. You'll still be better off. Also, when you buy fruit, as much as possible, get it organic and as fresh as possible. We try to buy most all our fruit. We can't always. And depending on where you live, you may not have this option at all. And that is from the farmer's market, where it's picked fresh, goes right there, and you get to eat it within 24 hours typically. In fact, when you buy berries, which I'm very in favor of, but that's not the only fruit. But when you eat berries from a farmer's market, usually you have to eat them within 1 to 2 days max, or they go bad. Fruit that never rots is not the way fruit was designed, okay? It's not supposed to be refrigerated for a year. So as best you can, try to get the freshest and organic fruit that you can, okay? That can be really helpful. Now, I went and I looked up some calories of fruit. So if you're into calories, I don't usually look at calories at all. That's why I had to go look it up. But here are some calories, okay? Half a grapefruit, 50. What about 1 cup of watermelon? 46. Now, I've heard a lot of things about watermelon that are not true. They say, never eat watermelon. It's like eating just plain sugar. Not true. Watermelon is mostly, like the name implies, water. It has tremendous amounts of fiber. It has great polyphenols like lycopene. It's great. It has other nutrients. So watermelon is typically inexpensive this time of year, and it's wonderful for you. Nobody got diabetes or obese because they ate watermelon, okay? Now, what about watermelon? I think I mentioned 1 cup of cut up watermelon, 46 calories. Now remember, the fiber makes all the nutrients unpack slowly. Now, an apple is a little higher in calories, 95, and a banana, 105. But talking about bananas, bananas are very good for you. I know you know about potassium, but they're full of lots of other good things. And you don't have to eat them green. But if you do eat green bananas, that is resistant starch. So that doesn't actually get digested much by you. It gets actually fermented by your gut microbes. So it's very good for your gut microbes. So if your goal is primarily to just feed your gut microbiome because you're trying to restore it to its pristine self as best you can, eat green bananas. But if you just enjoy eating bananas, just eat one that has lightly turned yellow, okay? You don't have to eat it green. Now, what's another one? I looked up strawberries. 1 cup, 49 calories. Of course, depends on exactly if it's an overflowing cup. And then I looked up, since it's like peach season now, it still is. I love peaches, and one medium is about 58 calories. Like I said, I'm not much into calories, but if you are, there you go. Now, how does that compare with cupcakes and pies and ice cream? Way below. But the biggest thing is these are actually healthy foods, unlike those other foods, which are not. Okay, so remember, fruit unpacks its ingredients slowly. It's full of incredible nutrients, antioxidants, minerals, vitamins, polyphenols. All the different colors are unique in their contents, so do not limit. Try to have diversity in your fruit, and don't be afraid of so-called tropical fruits, okay? People who lived in tropical areas where they have things like papayas and mangoes, they did not have obesity and diabetes because they ate papayas and mangoes or pineapples, okay? You don't have to go crazy with them, but those are really healthy foods. They have great fiber, all kinds of nutrients, like I discussed, and they can definitely be part of your healthy diet. Now, talking about diet, what do I recommend with fruit? If possible, don't snack. Except for, certain medical conditions, I speak against snacking because then you give your gut some rest. If the gut microbes and the lining cells, they need some time off. They shouldn't be constantly working. They need a lot of breaks. So don't eat more than 3 times a day. So if possible, don't snack. Now, this does not apply to children. Okay, children are supposed to snack, or people who are severely underweight, frail, coming off a serious illness or surgery. I'm talking about just normal, healthy adults. Snacking is preferred to be avoided. So when you eat your fruit, try to just make it part of the meal. I put fruit into my salads. A lot of restaurants do too. I have all kinds of fruit. Every kind of fruit tastes great in a salad with a balsamic dressing on top. So think about that. You can start your meal with fruit. You can end your meal with fruit. Whereas if you were in a restaurant, the worst thing you can do is start your meal with a bread bowl, right? Because that bread bowl turns right into sugar, or if you have a sweet drink. So going to a restaurant, starting with a sweet drink and a bowl of bread, your blood sugar will go shroop because those will unload the ingredients, which includes the simple sugars, really fast. So there goes your blood sugar. Because of the fiber, you can eat fruit at any time with your meal. In fact, if you eat something like a grapefruit, has so much fiber, but they all do, then that's great. So I love starting my meal with half a grapefruit or a piece of melon. I love that. But sometimes I'll end my meal with it. But try to combine it all together in the same, like, whatever hour that you're eating your meal. Don't like wait and then eat it hours later or even 45 minutes later, because then that is a snack. Okay? We really want to give our gut a rest. Experiment with different fruits. They all have some unique things, like green kiwis and even the yellow kiwis help a lot with constipation. Prunes are well known for constipation as well, but also help with bones. And pomegranates of superfruit has urolithin A from ellagic acid. Apples have quercetin. Oh, that makes me remember, don't peel your fruit unless you're in a place where you have to peel it because of contamination with E. coli or something. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about here, hopefully it will stay that way, in the US, where you can be pretty sure that your fruit isn't coated in E. coli or something. So wash your fruit, but do not peel it, okay? Unless it's like a special dish. But try really hard not to peel your fruit, because the fiber and a lot of the nutrients are actually in the peel. So don't peel it. And in fact, isn't it interesting about when you talk about berries? So actually, berries have a skin on each berry. So that's why berries are incredible for a crazy amount of high fiber, because each individual berry has its own coating of fiber known as like a little bit of a peel. So eat the skin, not if you don't really like it, like a kiwi, but some people eat kiwi skins. You can. It's not my favorite fuzzy thing to eat, but I know people who do. There are certain skins that you wouldn't eat, like pineapple or coconut, but eat the ones that you can and enjoy them. And you can bake apples. Think of using fruit as dessert, where you can have like a cut up fruit salad. You can bake apples and stuff them with walnuts and raisins. You can add in some cinnamon. And like a lot of Middle Eastern cultures do, you can have just a small number of these big medjool dates and stuff them with a walnut. Have 2, 3 great dessert. You can have a lot of sweetness in your life. It's called fruit. Fruit, part of a healthy diet. So I hope you got the message. Don't be afraid of fruit.